So Jen, I'm really excited to talk with you about selling, particularly for people who are mission-driven founders, haven't sold before, don't consider themselves salespeople. So I know you were going to go deeper on the sales discovery meeting, which is one of the key parts, but let's start with sales and the whole concept of being a salesperson.
Yeah. Ooh, salespeople. I get that sales can get a bad rep, and there's a mindset out there where, oh, I'm not a salesperson because it's manipulative, it's inauthentic, I don't want any part of that, it's exaggeration, it's getting people to do stuff that they really don't want to do. And I don't think that's sales at all. I think sales is actually about building connection and deep listening and empathy, and actually getting the prospect, getting the buyer what they want to solve their problem, and that it's a partnership throughout the whole process. So ultimately, I think it's a much more productive relationship than most people think. And also, sales is everywhere. We're doing sales all the time, whether or not we call ourselves salespeople. So I think there's a moment of reckoning that we need to accept there too. I mean, yeah, we're selling all the time. I mean, okay. What do you think you're doing when you're getting your kid to eat what you cook for them for dinner? Or when you're trying to get your friends to watch the Netflix special that you want to watch? Or when you're trying to, what else at work, get resources for your project, or you want to get time on your CEO's calendar? That is all sales. You cannot escape it. It's everywhere. It's water. So, you have a couple of choices. You can resist it or you can embrace it.
So what is it that makes sales scary for people then? How do you get them to embrace it?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to dismiss people who find sales scary, because there are some things that might be scary about it. I think it's scary for some people because it's measurable, right? There's no hiding in sales. You either won the deal or you lost it, and it's all on the dashboard for everyone to see. So that's one piece of it. I think another piece of it is that sales is about asking for what you want over and over and over again. It's also about listening for what the buyer wants, and it's about naming what you want and asking for it. And that leaves us vulnerable, because when we ask for what we want, we open ourselves up to rejection. Like sales, certainty to have rejection. No one has 100% close rate. And even when a deal does close, there's rejection along the way, tons of it. And so what I think can be scary is that I think a lot of us have been trained to think that no is the worst possible thing we can hear. Like, oh, no is bad, no is terrible. And actually, I think in sales, no is necessary. Like, no is a great thing because it's data. And actually, the more no's I hear, the closer I get to the heart of the matter. So I think having the buyer say no, having me say no as a seller is actually all good news. Or can be good news.
Great. So now let's flip that around. We're talking about the seller. Tell us about the buyer.
Yeah, the buyer. So what I will be asking the buyer to do, or at some point, is be my champion throughout the sales process. And so I think it would be nice to give that buyer a champion on our side too, and that's me as the salesperson. So again, we have this theme of partnership. And so let's say if sales is this loaded word, what if we swap out sales for the buyer's journey, which is more palatable and just something I work with people on, because that's really what it is. It's about making the best experience for your buyer as possible, because your sales experience is a snapshot of what your relationship is going to be like post-sale. And so by having a really strong sales process, a really powerful discovery call, you're setting expectations for the relationship, one, and that can be a really strong differentiator for you from the get-go.
And what are some common mistakes that people make on this buyer's journey that you're talking about?
I would say the biggest mistake is thinking you're doing the buyer a favor by allowing them to drive the process. You're like, okay, buyer, you decide what you want to do next. You decide, who do you want to talk to? Here, let me, I'm going to give you a bunch of resources. I'm going to give you, the 7 reasons to work with us. I'm going to give you a couple different case studies. I'm going to give you a thought leadership piece from our marketing team. And here, why don't you read all that over and let me know when you're ready to get back on the phone. Oh, you know what? I'll send you a proposal about what we talked about. And then, yeah, you get back to me when you're ready to move forward. So to me, that's just making the buyer do way too much work, making all those decisions. Who do I want to talk to next? How do I decipher all these attachments? Who do I need to bring into the conversation to move the purchase process along and the decision-making process along? And I think most buyers actually want to be led through a process, right? Because they're not the experts in buying the solution. We are as salespeople. And so, if we lead a sales process from a place of respecting everyone's time, partnership, and empathy, done with the right wording and tone, I think it just creates a much better experience for the buyer and for us too.
Great. So now let's talk about a discovery call, because I think when people think of sales, they think of cold calling and emailing and negotiating and closing deals. But you've talked about how important the discovery call is and how it's a skill to learn. So tell us more about a discovery call.
Yeah. Oh, I love the discovery call. Because it's a big time saver and it's just setting up the relationship, right? Good sales means good relationship. And I think it's that initial touch point to uncover the information that's really important to determine if we're a good fit, because we might be, or we might not be. And whatever it is great, as long as we find that out earlier on, right? The earlier, the better, to again, respect everyone's time. So by spending more time upfront assessing the quality of each lead, you're just going to save so much time on the back end. So by the time you're sending out proposals, there's just more alignment between you and the buyer on what a partnership could look like. And what that means is that more of your proposals end up closing because you spent more of that upfront time. Right? And the more proposals close, the more predictable your revenue can be. And more predictable revenue is kind of what this is all about, right? It allows for funding, hiring, planning, right? It's gold. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and how do you think about the different roles and responsibilities of everyone on the call?
Roles and responsibilities. Yeah, that's really important because I've definitely seen organizations that treat the sales process like hot potato. I go, I'm going to start and take the initial SDR call, then I'm going to pass it off to discovery, then I'm going to pass it off to a subject matter expert, then I'm going to pass it back. And again, when we think about this through the lens of the buyer's experience, like that's kind of awful. You're asking the buyer to kind of re-explain half of what they explained on the last call on every single call. So rather than the hot potato baton pass off metaphor, I'm more of in favor of like the primary physician, quarterback, whatever metaphor rings true for you, but with a single point of contact, that champion on our side for the buyer, who's then going to bring in different specialists at the strategic time during the process.
Great. Now, if you don't run a rigorous discovery process, what are some of the mistakes and gotchas that happen?
Yeah. So if you don't do a rigorous discovery process, a couple things can happen. One is that you get yesed the whole way through, right? And there's a rush, right? To let's say a salesperson's ears. If the buyer is saying, yes, we want it. Okay. If I don't dig deeper and do deep discovery, what is the need? What are we solving for here? And I just rush through the end and we sign the contract. I have for sure seen deals that then get to post-sale. And only when customer success has been handed off, the contract is signed, then everyone takes a deep breath and says, oh, wait, you didn't buy what you thought you were going to buy. And that just creates a real lackluster initiation into the company. And it affects customer experience, it affects churn, and it's just painful for everyone in that team. It creates friction between sales and CS and your product team, who now has to deliver something that you sold, even though you didn't really think you sold it. So it's just a communication disaster.
Okay, so how do you avoid that? What are some good ways? Good tips.
Yeah. Yes. So first thing, let's say for focusing on the discovery call is to be really clear with an agenda. Just get clear on what we want to get out of the call, what we want the buyer to get out of the call, and if we are a good fit, what next steps are. And a framework that I like to use, it's very simple, but I think it gets to the important stuff pretty quickly, is called BANT. That's budget, authority, need, and timeline. So just going through each of those. Budget. Are they willing to allocate money for the initiative? Authority. Who is making the decision here? Is it one stakeholder? Is it 7 stakeholders? Who's important to the process? Need is, what's the pain? Like, why are we actually here? Because we're not actually here because you want to buy 10 licenses, right? We're actually here because there's some deeper pain and impact that a problem is having on your team or the organization. And also the timeline. Are you just sifting for information for a purchase in 2 years, or is there urgency? Are you wanting to solve for something now? Because me as a salesperson really want to focus on the most urgent.
So I like this simple BANT framework: the budget, authority, need, timeline. But how do you put this into practice? What are the questions you ask? How do you frame all of this in a way that you're going to get those questions answered?
Yeah, the framing. And I'll go back to thinking about this as a relationship that goes both ways. So we want to listen and we want to explore the prospects and the buyer's need. And in return, we have some needs too. Because like with any relationship, if I just give it all, if it's one direction, I just give it all away, it's not good for the relationship. There's got to be equity in there. So things that we need to know are, right, who's important to this process, budget, authority, need, timeline. So the way to actually do that is through powerful questions, right? Coming up with, I guess in the example I gave where people can rush through the sales process, they get yes the whole way through. That's something what we call happy ears, where I'm like, oh, cool, the buyer is super excited. Do you want this? Yes. Do you want that? Yes, 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 yes. We have budget, we have timeline. Oh, great. It sounds so awesome. Let's go through. And there's a certain momentum in that's tempting to just speed up and get that deal across the finish line. And actually, when we're most tempted to speed up is when we actually want to slow down for a second and ask questions like, oh, okay, so when they say, hey, we want 10 licenses, we're like, oh, okay, this initiative sounds really important to you. What sparked it? What solution do you have in place? Like, what's not working about it? Or how long have you been looking for a solution, right? Are they early on in the process, or have they vetted, 5 to 10 buyers and they're still not finding what they're looking for, right? That changes the dynamic in my tone and my approach. And let's say once I ask those questions, oh, you're having a retention issue. Oh, you're having a communication issue, just as examples. So what's the impact of that? Oh, wow, your projects are taking twice as long as they should have. You're duplicating efforts. You're stopping and restarting because your head of IT and your head of strategy won't talk to each other. I'm using my own coaching business as an example here. And then let's see, with authority, right? Sometimes, we see HR drive these initiatives, or sometimes we see the head of the business department drive the initiatives. Like, what is it for you? Or I know you said you want to start right away and you're in a real rush. What's driving that? Is it a new personnel, a new system, just a new fiscal year? Like, help me understand that, because we want to make sure that we're building the right program for you. So I share those as a few types of powerful open-ended questions. Like the metaphor I like is just peeling back the onion and uncovering just this important information layer by layer. Because ultimately, I don't want to be the one telling them that this is an important project. I want to make them tell me how important it is. And you notice that I used a little bit of storytelling in there. We're saying, oh, we've seen HR head this initiative, or we've seen other business departments head that initiative. Like that's a really strategic use of storytelling that I think can be really powerful in a discovery call, because you have lots of stories, right? We have our origin story as a company, we have our approach, we have our client experiences. And I think the key to using storytelling effectively in a discovery call is to use it sparingly and to create an opening to ask a powerful question. So I'm not going to go in and say, hey, here's the whole founding story of this company. I can say instead, oh, we founded this company because we saw this gap in the market, that there's only cookie cutter services available. Is that what you're seeing? Right. So it's short and it's strategic, and it both establishes credibility and creates that opening to draw out more information from your buyer.
Great. So let's say this all works well and we're making good progress. What do we do next? What's the next step in a discovery call, or for the next step after this call?
Yeah, so the ultimate next step is to make the ask, right? We're asking for what we want. And that can vary based off of how the first discovery call goes, because you might find out that you need to do another discovery call with a stakeholder who wasn't on the initial call. Or you might realize that, hey, there's actually this ecosystem of stakeholders who it would actually be really great to get them on the call together. So what do we need in order to do that, to get everyone together for a scoping call or a demo, whatever it might be? So it kind of depends on your product and just the buyer. But it's really about making the ask and being prepared for the hesitation, right? Because again, we're the experts here on the buying process, and we might be asking the buyer to do something that they're not necessarily comfortable doing. So if we ask them, hey, can we actually bring your boss, the decision maker, for example, into our next call, right? There's naturally could be hesitancy, like, oh no, I don't want to waste my VP's time. Or we just want to be like, no, I own this. And a junior member of the team just really wanting to own it and creating barriers to the other stakeholders who need to be part of the process. And so, hold on, let me think about that. Why did I just say all that? And so I say all that because I want us to be prepared for those hesitations and those objections, and be ready with the rebuttal, right? If, let's say, a buyer doesn't want to bring other stakeholders on the call, what can we say? Okay, one option. Okay, well, what's important to us is having all the people that are critical to this conversation be involved early on in the buying process. Because what we've seen, and again, this is a story you can use strategically, what we've seen is that we'll get really far in a process, and then all of a sudden a stakeholder who really should have been a part of it wasn't, and last minute they come in with a new consideration that actually changes the whole design and scope, and then we have to actually go back to the very beginning and rescope it out. And it's not a good use of time. And by sharing that, that is the truth. There's nothing manufactured or inauthentic about it. That happens all the time when the right stakeholders aren't convened early on in the process. So that's one story that I've used from experience. Another one, let's say if a junior person doesn't want to bring their VP in. Another option is just to name the elephant in the room. Hey, I totally get you don't want to waste your VP's time. I don't want to waste your VP's time either. Would it be helpful to give you just a sense of what we'd be walking them through? And then you can have a truncated version of your demo deck to say, hey, look, this is what we'd be walking them through, asking them, what their walking them through the platform, aligning on their strategic goals, seeing what kind of data they want to collect from the initiative. I'm just making stuff up right now. And, is this something you think they would find useful in their decision process, and like helping them see that they're not going to be blindsided when they actually take the risk and connect you with their VP. I would say one more option is to ask those strategic questions of the junior person, because those strategic questions are really important to scoping out a program that's actually going to meet the needs of the buyer. So examples, how are you going to measure the success of this initiative? Like, how are you going to know that we knocked it out of the park together? What kind of data are you hoping to collect? How do you want to use it so we can craft the program in a way that's going to generate that data for you? How does this initiative fit in with some of your other strategic initiatives? And those are things that a junior person might not know the answer to. And so by asking that, they might realize themselves, that's the hope, that, oh, actually, it would be great to bring in other people who can answer these questions in a more thorough way.
Great. So let's say we've now run these calls really well based on these like really practical tips. What kind of tools do you need to use so that you're tracking this and other deals? How much technology or lack thereof?
One piece of tech that I love is printing out bants on a piece of paper before my calls. And it might sound, I don't know if it sounds silly, but it actually really helps me just keep track. Because even if I don't get all the answers to what is their budget, who's the authority, what is their need, what is their timeline, it's still important to make the ask. So as an example, with budget, most buyers won't tell you, oh yeah, I have a X budget for this on the very first call. They're like, oh, there's no budget, we haven't decided a budget. And the only time budget will come up is when if you get to that stage where you put a proposal in front of them, it can be, oh my gosh, this is way out of budget. And then you can say, well, because you asked before, you can say, oh, well, last time we chatted, you said there was no budget for this initiative. It sounds like you might have gotten more clarity on kind of what your budget can support here. Can you share more about that? And so because you've been good about asking ahead of time, you can anchor to that later on in the process. And I'll give another example. So when a buyer is, let's say, dragging their feet, right? If you ask early on in the discovery, hey, what's your timeline here? When are you hoping to go live with this initiative? Oh, we're looking to go live at the beginning of Q3 because of, personnel, IT, whatever it might be, other initiatives, the CEO wants this, I don't know, it could be a lot of different things. So at the point in the sales process where things just aren't moving, right, you can go back in and ask, hey, in order to launch, you told me that you wanted to launch by the beginning of Q3. If we work backwards, according to get the integration set up, the implementation, the training, whatever needs to be put in place for that launch, we actually need to get a contract in place by X date. And that's coming up soon. So can you help me understand what remains in your approval process so that we can get sign off by this date and launch by your goal? So those are just a couple examples.
So you've asked a lot of really good questions with a good tone to get people to open up and give you answers. How do you know if this is a good prospect or not a good prospect?
Yeah. So let's see, kind of those maybe yellow/reddish flags that maybe this isn't a good fit. Might be, if your timeline just doesn't sync up. Hey, they're just doing some initial information collecting and they really aren't going to make a decision until, I don't know, this time next year. And if that's much longer than your typical sales process, then it's probably really doesn't make sense for you to continue and bring your team together to walk them through a full demo. Another thing is if they're just out of budget, right? If it's like there's no point because we're, I don't know, 5 times what you're ready to spend. So if you go through this process and determine like, hey, this actually isn't a good fit, you're at this choice point. Do you turn this into a qualified lead or do you close it down? So if you do decide to close it down, you always want to or I always want to like thank the person for their time to evaluate us. So thank you for reaching out. Thank you for considering us. It doesn't sound like our timing syncs up here, or it sounds like we just might be out of budget, but here's a resource for you from our company's thought leadership. Here's a couple other vendors that might better fit your needs. And ultimately, by disqualifying a lead, you're protecting everyone's time. You're protecting their time so they can go over and spend their time evaluating better fits. And you're protecting your own company's resources by not pouring that time and energy into a deal that has no urgency behind it, that has no budget behind it, et cetera. And I will say that for the leads that you do move on to your sales process, you're not done with BANT. You want to constantly reconfirm BANT at every touch point moving forward, because things change throughout the sales process all the time. And what we want to make sure of is when they do change, that we're aware of it.
Great. Thank you, Jen. I think you've not only outlined the process and demystified some things that people haven't been exposed to before, but you also gave really good questions framed with a really good tone that make people feel comfortable and open to sharing, which I think is one of the hardest skills to develop in sales. So I hope people pick up not only the process, but just some of the very practical phrases and tone and relationship building that you evidenced here, and that I know you've built up over experience selling.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of practice. You know, another tool you'll build for yourself is this objections and rebuttals sheet, right? With the common objections, you'll notice patterns start to appear at certain points, and you'll get to practice of what objections, what tone, what wording feels like you, right? Just kind of make it your own in a way, because I don't know, when it feels forced, I think people on the other side can really tell. So if we're really coming from a place of just generally trying to understand and trying to help, I think it goes a long way.
Okay, thank you.